All right, wonderful. Welcome to Gardening Opportunities in Our Changing Climate. The goal of this program I've created for you in honor of Earth Day is to help you grow resilient gardens during times of excessive weather. The Russian River Watershed Association is our sponsor this evening, and they are a coalition of 10 cities, counties, and special districts in the Russian River Watershed that have come together to coordinate regional programs for clean water, habitat restoration, and watershed enhancement. The association works to promote cooperation and implementation of projects that protect watershed resources, restore fisheries, and improve water quality at reduced costs to our member agencies and communities they serve. Related to gardening, that means avoiding chemicals that can be washed off our yards and gardens and into seasonal creeks and storm drains by irrigation and rainwater. So we're going to go through slides for about an hour, and I will definitely leave time for your questions at the end. So as your questions come up, please type them into the Q&A, and then I will look at them after we've completed my program. And this evening, I will provide you with a brief introduction of what the Our Water, Our World program is. And then we will dive in to talk about how climate change and weather affects the landscapes and how we manage pests, or what the pests we're going to see will be. And then how to grow resilient gardens, and then tools to protect plants from extreme conditions. So Our Water, Our World is a national award-winning clean water program that partners with pollution prevention agencies and retailers that sell pesticides. We provide integrated pest management education to both the retail associates and to the public around less toxic pest management. Our Water, Our World goal is to bring awareness between pesticides and water quality, explaining how the products that we use around our home and garden can end up polluting our local waterways. You can learn more about the Our Water, Our World program at ourwaterourworld.org. And so watersheds are gardens and water quality. How is this all related? Watersheds drain any water or snowmelt that isn't absorbed into the ground into a local waterway, such as a stream, a creek, a river, that then might flow to lakes or reservoirs, estuaries, marshes, bays, and eventually the ocean. In urban areas and around our gardens, all of that water that isn't absorbed into the ground runs into a storm drain or seasonal creek that then goes untreated to the nearest waterway, taking with it any chemicals, pet waste, motor oil, debris, synthetic fertilizers, residuals from pesticides, or whatever is out there in the environment that isn't breaking down will be taken with that water into the local waterways without getting filtered. So we just like to bring this awareness so that we can learn about alternative products that we can use that will not have residuals that will impair our waterways. And you can learn more at the Our Water, Our World program website. So since we teach integrated pest management principles, and a big part of pest management is keeping our gardens healthy, I wanted to start by just sharing briefly a little bit, remind us about what integrated pest management is. So it allows us to address the cause. Oftentimes when we see a pest problem or what we think is a pest problem, something's chewing on a plant, it's oftentimes the symptoms of something else. So we might see that little soldier beetle, and then we might go, oh my gosh, soldier beetle is the one causing the problem, when it's really maybe the aphid that is causing the problem, and the soldier beetle is there to eat the aphid. Or maybe it's irrigation is broken and that plant is really stressed, or there's so many reasons why pest problems can occur. So with IPM, it allows us to address the cause using science-based strategies. And through that lens of IPM, it allows us to look at our home and garden as a whole and take steps to prevent pest problems from occurring. But when we see something that looks like a pest problem or an issue, we then take a deeper look to see what is actually going on. Proper identification is key, and then we determine if the problem that we have, is it something we can live with? For instance, will those aphids just at some point go away, or do we need to take action? The action steps in IPM are referred to as controls: cultural controls, which is increasing the health of the environment; mechanical controls, which are the tools we use to manage the pest problems; biological controls are the living organisms we use to manage pest problems like beneficial insects; and then chemical controls are the pesticides we're always going to use as a last resort when we've exercised all those other options, and we're always going to choose eco-friendly whenever possible. In this program I've prepared for you, our focus is going to be on cultural controls. So let's dive in. So here in California, we live in a Mediterranean climate that experiences rain throughout the winter and into the early spring months, moving into many months of dry weather. So this is very normal for Sonoma County and throughout California. We can expect to have most of our precipitation between December and March. And ideally, we will start getting rains as early as October, and they can go as late as May. So, but as you can see in this graph, it's primarily very dry through the majority of the summer and into fall. However, over the past several years, extreme weather events such as excessive heat and triple-digit temperatures over a period of a few days, even weeks, in parts of the county that are not accustomed to this, and extreme rain events such as atmospheric rivers that lead to flooding are now normal and to be expected. So let's begin by talking about how plants react to heat. So plants have pores on their leaves called stomata, which allow them to photosynthesize. During times of heat, plants will close their stomata to prevent moisture loss. This stops or slows the process of photosynthesis. Plants can look wilted during this time. If this period of stress lasts too long, then plants will begin to show signs of stress by experiencing tip dieback or root dieback, stunted growth, leaf drop, yellowing leaves due to prolonged and intensive heat stress that inhibits plant photosynthesis. Now, note that plants can also look wilted if they've received too much water, or if the soil is too wet and not draining. So it is always important to, if your plants look wilty, to feel that soil to make sure that it is dry before we water again. And it's always best to rehydrate that soil during the cool part of the day. So either waiting till the evening or first thing in the morning. Water-stressed plants can show symptoms that resemble disease caused by plant pathogens. So, in addition, plants affected by drought, they can stresses from drought can also make them more susceptible to disease, opening the way for pathogens to infect that plant when they're not at their healthiest state. So this is kind of a cause and effect. What we can see from excessive heat is, as I mentioned, a couple of things already, like leaf drop or tip dieback, but sunburn and sun scald. In fact, I have some tiger lilies, their leaves from the excessive heat over the last couple of days ago. I noticed that they have some sun scald on their leaves from those days of heat. They just weren't acclimated yet. They weren't accustomed to getting that type of intense heat so quickly. So you might already see some effects of just those couple of days of 80 degrees that we experienced last week. But other symptoms or other effects we could see on our plants would be bark split, discoloration, and so forth. But leaves, the example of the leaf on the top right of that orchid leaf, so that was sunburn or sun scald. And over time, that center part is going to dissolve, decompose, and fall out. And after that happens, it very well can look like it's slug or snail damage. So, something just to keep in mind that when we have sunburn or when our plants have some sun damage, or we see these types of issues on our plants, we want to notice, was there a weather event recently that could have caused this, or is there evidence of slug and snail damage? In the event that it is from sun damage, we want to keep those leaves on the plant. We do not want to prune them off yet because they're actually protecting the leaves that are underneath and also shading the rest of that plant or tree. Other symptoms due to excessive heat could be mistaken for disease that attack the plant's root system and vascular systems, like armillaria root rot and verticillium wilt. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Common pests that thrive during hot, dry conditions are, of course, spider mites, whiteflies, powdery mildew, bark beetles, and tree borers. So monitoring for pests is the best defense. Using sticky traps to monitor will also really help with especially spider mites, whiteflies, and so forth. But gently pruning our plants to increase the airflow will reduce these pest problems. Now let's look at how our landscapes react during excessive rains. So during excessive rains, and we have a lot of water on our properties, we want to avoid walking on wet, soggy soil. We want to avoid mowing and working on wet soil because it's going to compact that soil. So though the rains bring the weeds, we want to wait until the soil has dried out some before we actually get out there with the line trimmers or the mowers. We also want to avoid parking any equipment, machinery, cars on wet soil because, yes, not only will they compact that soil, they're most likely going to get stuck, which is a very common occurrence here throughout the county during those wet winter months. Note areas of standing water so that you can correct those areas and increase that drainage when the area has dried out during the later spring months. We want to also avoid adding fertilizer during times of rain since it'll wash away. It will not go where we like it to go. We also want to avoid applying pesticides when rain is in the forecast of 48 hours. Because it is really important when we are applying pesticides, such as a dormant application of horticultural oil or copper fungicide, it is important that those products dry completely on the plant prior to the rain, or they're just going to get washed off. So it is good to say 48 hours before expected rains. And then avoid pruning during wet conditions unless absolutely necessary. If a limb is going to maybe be a threat to a structure, then of course cut it. However, we want to do our deciduous, fruit tree, and rose pruning when there's no rain in the forecast for a few days because we want all of those cuts to heal over. Because if there is moisture and those cuts are still fairly raw, then that can invite pathogens into that tissue. And then we, of course, want to make sure any potted plants around our decks or around our gardens have really good drainage and they're not just sitting in a saucer of water. We want to make sure they're draining. And then pests we commonly see during times of wet conditions are slugs and snails. Using a snail or slug board is going to be a wonderful trap and much better than working with a slug or snail bait, such as iron phosphate baits, because during the wet rainy season, they will just melt. The slugs and snails won't have a chance to ingest them yet. Earwigs and ants and cockroaches will start to try to enter our homes. So exclude them by caulking up cracks and crevices, installing weather stripping and door sweeps to seal up points of entry. Weeds As I mentioned, yes, when the rains come, so do the weeds. I feel like oxalis might be the very first one that pops up after that first rain, but we want to avoid mowing in those wet soil areas and wait until those areas have dried out enough to walk on, so we're not compacting that nice soil. We'll start to see more mushrooms. Those are the fruiting bodies of the mycelium. Remember, just put on some gloves and remove those mushrooms and toss them into the green waste bin. If you do happen to see mushrooms at the base of a tree, it is always nice to take some photos, maybe with a small ruler or a pencil or a pen next to the mushrooms for scale, and then bring him to the local University of California Cooperative Extension to have that properly identified. That is always really nice because tree health is very important. And then, of course, mosquitoes. Mosquitoes love water. They just need a teaspoon of standing water, and it is a breeding frenzy. So we're going to empty any pots or saucers, tarps, and anywhere water might be pooling. We want to just make sure there is no standing water, and we want to flip those saucers over and so forth so that water cannot pool there to avoid mosquito breeding. And then how do we determine if the problem is from a pest or from the environment? How do we determine if the plant's biotic factors from abiotic disorders? So biotic factors are living or once living organisms in the ecosystem. So for us gardeners, it means the damage to the plant is caused by a pest, such as a snail or an earwig or an aphid, or from a fungal disease or bacterial disease like black spot, rust, peach leaf curl, just to name a few. But then abiotic factors refer to non-living physical and chemical elements in the ecosystem, such as weather, water, light, heat, cold, wind, frost, hail, gas, or other chemicals and minerals and so forth. So how do we distinguish what caused the problem? We want to identify the host, including the cultivar. And then we want to see, are the nearby plants of different species also showing the same symptoms? And then we want to examine the environmental conditions to see, did something happen? I helped a customer recently. This was actually last spring, and she had what she thought was black spot on her dahlia leaves. And she was coming into the store looking for a fungicide that the dahlia grower that sold her the tubers told her to get. After speaking with her a little longer, it turned out it was hail damage that was causing the black spot because we had had a hailstorm the week before, and I had noticed that on some of my plants, not my dahlias, but what I had noticed was my dahlias were in good shape because they were kind of under overhang. So that's what we're talking about. Is it a biotic factor or an abiotic disorder? Okay, so I've talked a lot about what happens to our plants during extreme weather events. Now let's talk about what we can do to protect them and make them more resilient to withstand any weather. So we're going to build healthy soil, support and nurture the life in that soil, protect the soil around the root zone of our plants, water deeply around the root zone to meet the needs of the plants as they grow. And then once it's established, we want to look at the tools available to maximize efficiency and to protect our plants. And we want to include regionally appropriate plant material. When we're adding new plants to the garden, we really want to make sure it's regionally appropriate. And then we want to do our best to support the ecology of the garden and retain the rain, keeping as much rainwater on site in our gardens as much as possible. So Step one is to build healthy soil. And I'm sure many of you are aware of this. I love that this is actually trending. I really feel that many of us as gardeners understand that healthy soil is full of life. It contains high levels of organic matter, which includes important living organisms. There is beneficial fungus and bacteria and invertebrates that move throughout it. There is healthy soil also has good water infiltration, which means water by rain or irrigation that lands on that soil is able to get absorbed fairly quickly and not pool. So it has a high, healthy soil has high water holding capacity, which means that it can hold water for longer. So think about your healthy soil as really being like a sponge. And imagine pouring water on the sponge. It will hydrate and it will stay damp for a little bit of time. So this is really what we want. We want our healthy soil to do the same. That's what we want our soil to be like, is really a sponge. We never really want it to completely dry out. We want it to always be slightly moist so it can always absorb more water. When soil is completely dry, it's oftentimes very hydrophobic, and it could take a little bit of time for that water to actually infiltrate. So the living organisms in that soil will assist with delivering not only the nutrients, but also water to the plants when they need it. And when you have healthy soil, it doesn't require chemical fertilizers and it reduces the needs for pesticides because you have healthier plants. And just to emphasize the connection between healthy soil and water, it is important both in times of drought and heavy rains. Because again, we want the soil to be able to absorb water quickly so it doesn't pool like in this photo. It doesn't run off into the street where it can pick up waste and debris and residuals from pesticides or mulch and soil, and then that's coming off of our properties, off of our gardens, and then down to the storm drain where it can possibly clog the storm drain and cause flooding or contaminate the waterways. We want as much water to soak into that soil as possible. So again, good soil structure means good water infiltration, soaking the water in and holding it like a sponge for long periods of time. The best way to turn your soil into a sponge is with compost. So you can buy really good quality compost from the local garden center or hardware store or make it yourself. But when we're adding compost to the soil, we will improve that soil structure, which holds more water. It also creates more pore space so that water can infiltrate with ease and roots can move and grow and expand. Healthy compost-rich soil can actually be a climate solution. So climate solution by drawing down and sequestering and sequesters carbon. It also reduces the use of chemical inputs made from fossil fuels. It builds resilience against drought and flood and protects against soil desertification and erosion. We can get soil compost into the soil by mixing it in at time of planting or working it in around the drip line of the plants, or simply making a compost tea and applying it as a foliar feed or soil drench. We add compost because we want to increase the biology in the soil in the form of bacteria and fungi. As gardeners, we're not just growing plants, but we are growing our own soil organisms, supporting the life in that soil. Plants can't take up nutrients in the soil without the microbiology. Plants need that bacteria and fungi to process the organic matter and organic fertilizers and turn them into plant available form. So, which is pretty cool. It's just like our gut microbiome that turns food we eat into nutrients that our body can absorb. So, the picture on the left, I really love. It's the mycorrhizal fungi. That's also really important, which will have a symbiotic relationship with the roots and work like root extenders that will stretch out and be able to access nutrients and water from further out, making it readily available to that plant when it needs it. Another way to add nutrients to the soil is with organic fertilizers. So we're going to, compost is wonderful, but plants need fertilizer too. It's important to feed with organics in the form of a dry fertilizer that's added to the soil around the root zone or at time of planting, or a liquid fertilizer that's diluted with water and applied around that root zone as a soil drench. Organic all of these are derived from organic matter, such as mushrooms or manures, kelp, bone, blood, fish meal, things like that. They're not derived from fossil fuels and also oftentimes have lower NPK numbers. You can identify what an organic fertilizer is. Oftentimes they'll have the logos like OMRI certification or CDFA or similar. And then we can always read the label and see what those ingredients are in that product. And oftentimes you should be able to read and recognize all of the ingredients. We apply organic fertilizers to the garden to increase the health of the plants and the soil. And just to share a couple of things, I know a lot of people still like to feed with their synthetics. However, the difference between synthetics versus organics is that when we feed with synthetics, we're feeding the plant, and then that plant becomes, but then we need to feed more often. We have to feed in accordance to the label. If that label of the synthetic fertilizer says we have to feed every 6 weeks, then we have to feed every 6 weeks. And if we happen to go on vacation or it's too hot to go outside and we miss a feeding, then that plant starves, so to speak, and becomes stressed. Over time, that stressed plant will start to show pest problems. Plants also become dependent on it and will need to be fed more often. In accordance to the rate on the package, and which can be more expensive over time. Synthetic fertilizers will actually stimulate rapid new growth, which might look great, but it's actually going to invite pests, and pests feed on that tender, sugary juices in that new growth. And also synthetic fertilizers are going to be high in salts, which over time could be detrimental to the plants. So we want to just keep that in mind. Whereas organic fertilizers, we're actually feeding the soil microbiology, which allows the plant to access the nutrients on an as-need basis and increases the soil health and prevents those growth spurts, allowing that plant to grow in a more natural rate. So we can't over-fertilize with organics, and we don't need to feed as frequently. So it's a little bit more natural and healthier for the plant. Soil does not like to be bare. We want to make sure that we are always protecting that soil. So one great way to protect it is with cover crops. Cover crops are plants that are planted to cover and feed the soil rather than for the purpose of being harvested for food. So for those of us that like to grow food, and we might have some areas that are bare during certain times, like an unused veggie bed, or maybe planters that we put seasonal annuals in, but during a few months of the year, they're just bare. It is nice to protect that soil and to revitalize that soil and keep it living and growing and being healthy by adding cover crops. My favorite is going to be fava beans because they're so easy to grow and they thrive very well here. But when we are we're growing a cover crop in between our food or annual crops, understand the cover crop is replenishing nitrogen in the soil, it's feeding soil microbiology, and when it's in flower, it's also going to support our beneficial pollinators throughout the year. Mulch is something else that we recommend. Of course, we're going to apply it in accordance with CAL FIRE's recommendations, not within the first 5-foot perimeter of a structure, of course, but throughout the flower beds and beyond, we want to have a nice 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch in the form of natural wood bark or straw or something that is going to be organic that can break down over time to feed that soil. Remember, soil is hydrophobic if it is bare, and if we add water to it, it can too quickly, that water will just run right off. We do, on the other hand, want to make sure sections of the garden are bare and uncultivated so that we can support the soil-dwelling native bees. But in other areas of the garden, we do want to have mulch because it is going to aid in that water infiltration, reduce evaporation significantly, which will mean we don't have to water as often. It's going to actually regulate temperatures around the root zone in the soil. And keep that soil cooler during the summer months or warmer during the winter months, which is important. And then when we apply mulch, we're actually reducing soil compaction and erosion, as well as reducing weed seeds from germinating and providing habitat for beneficial insects. We just want to make sure we're always keeping that mulch away from any of the crown of the plant or any branches or stems. But then watering is a big component of how to keep a healthy garden. So now let's talk a little bit about watering and irrigation, which is one of my favorite topics. I'll review where to direct the water, how long to water for, how frequently we should water our plants, and then a few tips on using some irrigation systems. So some of this might be review, but what I'd like to emphasize is that we are going to use water to grow deep, healthy root systems. Okay, so the roots are only going to go where the water goes. When we water shallowly, we grow shallow root zones. When we have a hot day out of nowhere and our irrigation isn't set for that, or we're not around to rehydrate the soil, that water evaporates out and that root zone dries out. If the irrigation doesn't come on for a day or two, or we're not around to water for a day or two, then that plant gets stressed out. Over time of this repeating, then that plant is going to start to show signs of stress with pests or with a reduced growing rate, or actually a reduced life cycle, where it might actually shorten its life. When we water deeply, that water can when we water deeply, we will grow deeper root systems. And if we happen to have that hot day, the top few inches of the soil will dry out sooner than expected, but there's still enough water deeper down for the roots to access that hydration, and which will cause no to little stress on the plant. So we always want to focus that water at the outer edges of the drip line of the plant, and keep in mind that as the plant grows, so does the roots. So we direct the water to reach the root zone as shown in these illustrations. And when we water our plants, our goal is to get that water down about 6 to 12 inches, of course, depending on what that plant material is. So the depth depends on, like if it's a perennial, we might just want to go about 6 inches down, whereas larger trees and shrubs, we may want to target that water to infiltrate and to get down about 12 inches or so. The water is still going to move beyond these depths, but for us to understand how deeply we need to water, and then we're not going to water again until the top, let's say 3 to 5 inches, maybe even 6 inches has dried out. And again, this depends on the plant material. Plants that want really dry roots before watering again, we might want to, really let that soil dry out even deeper than something that might want regular moist hydration. And then keep in mind that trees are the priority during this time of the year, or during times of drought. So they and they have very large root zones. That is typically growing beyond the canopy. So trees are important. They are the priority in the landscape because they provide so many services to the ecosystem. They sequester carbon, they provide shade, they keep areas cooler, they provide so much habitat for the critters in our area. But it's really important to consult with a licensed arborist to see if providing additional water beyond what we get in the winter months in the form of rain, like for instance, a nice deep soak once or twice during the summer months, if that is necessary. Okay, because in some cases it might be, and depending again on what the plant material is. And typically we're looking at July, August, or September because these are the months that have the longest daylight hours, the hottest temperatures, and we're the furthest away from a rain event. Not all species of trees need deep watering during the summer, so please again consult with an ISA certified arborist. And then a couple notes about irrigation systems. For those of us with irrigation systems, perhaps we haven't even turned them on yet. They still might be off. When we turn them on, it's important to flush those systems and inspect for clogs or leaks. It's not unusual for like a little spider or some insects to get into that emitter and to clog it, or for critters to chew on the ends of those emitters to break the lines, or actually when we're adding plants, sometimes we break a line and we forget that we've done it or we didn't notice. So we want to adjust and inspect. And then we want to adjust the controller for a new season. It's not a set it and forget it system. So how we had it set last fall might be really different than how we need to set it now. So just keep that in mind. And the best time to water our plants is really during the sunrise hours. So I'd like to say between like 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. Not only is this going to prevent pest problems, but it also is going to be the best for our plants because the soil and the air is still going to be cool, and that water can get absorbed into the soil with ease. When possible, we're going to convert pop-up sprays and sprinklers to drip, because drip irrigation, we can then target the root zone without losing any evaporation. We want to look at whoever our water supplier is, to see if there's any rebates for switching to drip, or to get rebates for adding a smart controller to update our current irrigation controller. I do know that there are a lot of rebates out there, so take advantage of those. And then the different kind of emitters that we have in our garden, or that we might have if we have an irrigation system set up. The photo on the left is an emitter coming from the end of a 1/4-inch tubing that's also referred to as spaghetti tubing. The smaller tubing is then connected to that 1/2-inch tubing that we call, sometimes we refer to it as PE tubing. This can then, these emitters can, get on, long pieces of that 1/4-inch spaghetti tubing, and they can move around, and we can adjust and move them as the plants grow. The picture on the right is a 1/2-inch PE tubing that comes in tubes that we plug into emitters into it, or it comes with emitters within the tubing that are spaced anywhere for like 6, 12, or 18 inches. Different emitters have different flow rates. There is no standard among the different brands, unfortunately. The most common is a 1 gallon per hour flow rate, but it is, if you are unaware of what the flow rate is, of how much water is coming out of that emitter when you have it on, it is really important to go out there and put a little container underneath it, and then see how much water is coming out over that period of time, so that you can adjust your controller, because a 1/2 gallon per hour versus a 2 gallon per hour is a big difference. Okay, so that's just something I want to share. And then it is really important that we adjust the irrigation as the plants grow. please avoid watering at the crown of the plant, like in this picture. This is actually going to cause crown rot, root rot, and reduce the lifespan of this tree. So for those of us that hand water, a side note is that it might feel like we've really watered well, that we've been out there a long time and we are just watering the dickens out of that soil. However, it is really important to check. It is very important just to make sure that water is getting as deep as you think it is, because trust me, sometimes it only gets down about a half an inch when you really thought it should have gotten down at least 4 inches. The reason why is that some plant mediums, some of the materials in the soil additives that we add contain things like peat moss or coir, and those could take some time to hydrate. They are quite hydrophobic until they're hydrated. So at the beginning, we want to learn how to water, how that water is moving through the soil, how deep it's getting. We want to check. And then once we've checked a few times, then we're kind of like can have a better understanding of how that water is moving through the soil. It is always nice to water once and then to go over a second or third time, and that will really help get that water to soak in deeper. We can always put our fingers in the soil to see if it's wet or dry. We can use moisture meters because, of course, a layer of mulch will also inhibit, it will protect that soil. It will aid with water infiltration, but it might, that the top is always going to look dry. So that's why we want to make sure we check down below. Yes. Yeah, just get in the habit of feeling the soil. I'm always really surprised personally. Anyway, then we want to protect our plants from sun and heat, because sometimes the soil might be hydrated, but that plant is still looking wilty. And that means it because it just really is it's too much. It needs a little protection. So taking advantage and utilizing shade cloth is going to be really helpful. It's going to benefit our plants. Of course, we always want to tent it over our plants so air circulation can still flow through. 30 to 50% shade is going to be ideal for most of the plants. So I usually get a 40%. That's how they're rated. You can buy them with different ratings and understand that 75% shade is best for shade lovers. So like if a tree has just been removed in an area that used to be all shade, you want to get a covering of 75% to protect those plants until something has been put in to protect them, or if you're reworking that section of the garden. And then for young trees, newly planted fruit trees and so forth, we want to paint their trunks with a horticultural paint. IV Organics is a brand that can help. It also has some pest and rodent prevention qualities to it. But we can also just use any latex paint that is a light color that is mixed 50-50 with water. And we're always going to paint from the base of that trunk all the way up to where the branches start to open up. And that will prevent sunburn. Some other products and tools that we can use that will really help is anti-transparents, which are a clear waxy material that we spray onto the leaves. It lasts about a week. It seals in that water and prevents that evapotranspiration. So when I was talking about so it keeps the water in the leaves so that the stomata don't have to close their pores. We're not losing any hydration. And then this allows the plant to continue to photosynthesize, which is perfect. So it's going to reduce that stress. These products are also excellent during times of frost. It's just that nice extra coating that will prevent that tissue from getting burned from frost and from heat. And now we're going to look at plant selection. So we're going to always choose climate appropriate plants. Here in California, we live in a Mediterranean climate. So in addition to plants that are from a Mediterranean region, we want to favor plants that are California natives because they can adapt to where we live and handle our winter precipitation and then periods of long dry summer months. We can also look at choosing plants that are going to be pest and disease resistant. There are many varieties now at the garden centers that are actually going to be pest and disease resistant. So those would be favorable. We choose climate appropriate plant material that can adapt and grow with ease, which will naturally reduce pest problems. The right plant, the right place is the name of the game. We want to do our homework. We always want to match plants to the conditions of the garden and keep them from being stressed and susceptible to pest problems. We want to match the mature size of the plant to the space available. We want to avoid over pruning. Not all plants like to get pruned as much as boxwoods or pittosporums. So keep that in mind. We want to avoid overcrowding. We always want plants to have nice air circulation and maybe just brushing against each other. And then we're always going to group plants together that share the same needs once established, that will like the same water needs, the same sun exposure needs, and so forth. So these are all important to keep in mind. And we can look at lawn substitutes, different plants that look like a lawn or turf, but can provide more benefits that will require less work, less fertilizer, less resources, and also feed beneficial organisms. So there are some grassy native grasses that will adapt extremely well to our area that can get mowed or not. And then, of course, some ground covers that knit really tightly together. The Diamondia, which is in the lower left corner, is one of my favorites. It has these beautiful little yellow coin daisy-like flowers. And then, of course, Creeping Thyme, one of my all-time favorites. And when it is in bloom, bees just go cuckoo for it. It is just pollinator haven. And then we also want to consider adding plants that will support the complex food systems that surround us. So all of these friends in our wildlife, in the ecology of our garden, really are doing an amazing service for us. So I like to support them whenever possible. We want to invite our natural enemies. We want to consider inviting the 3 Ps, the predators such as ladybugs and lacewings, where their larvae will consume insects as food, reducing the populations of the pests and bad bugs. We want to invite the parasites, such as the parasitic wasps that use the host pest as a nursery for their young. Really crazy. And then the pollinators, of course, such as the bees, the butterflies, moths, flies, hummingbirds, all to help fertilize the flowers, which will increase productivity in our food crops and assist with our flowers throughout the garden. You can consider plants that will look like the flowers that look like a daisy or a sunflower, such as asters or erigeron, cosmos, gaillardia, rudbeckia. These are going to be ideal, as well as flowers that grow in clusters of tiny flowers, such as yarrow, ceanothus, sweet alyssum, and then, of course, letting herbs go to flower like parsley, cilantro, dill. The reason why we want to bring in these types of flowers for our beneficials is because our beneficials are tiny and they really like tiny flowers as nectar and pollen sources. And then for those of us that grow food, we want to choose heirloom varieties. Heirloom varieties are ideal for a California climate because most of them are coming from a Mediterranean climate somewhere else. Heirloom varieties are typically going to be more drought tolerant. Their root zones are typically deeper divers, which will then reduce the frequency of watering, and which means they're going to be water savers and they are going to be able to withstand our long, hot summers. And then lastly, we'll just review how to keep as much water on site. I know we have another webinar recently prepared that you can review, but the idea here in brief is to keep as much water on site by slowing it, spreading it, sinking it, and storing it. So that's really what we want to consider. So when we have water and as a rain event, we want to consider all of the different ways that we can keep it on site. There just leads to so many of the benefits. So we do this by planting trees and shrubs because they are going to really promote the the ecology of the ecosystem. They're going to help hold on to more rainwater, believe it or not. We're going to consider installing rain gardens, which is, guiding the rainwater from the downspout into something that looks like a swale or a dry creek bed or a very shallow planting, which I'll show you in a moment. Or we want to consider capturing that rainwater into rain barrels and cisterns. And then we also want to consider increasing any hardscape that we have around our properties to make it pervious surfaces so that that water can still infiltrate through the hardscape. The benefits are huge. It just leads to an overall healthier landscape. And when we can hold on to rainwater, it replenishes the water in the soil and recharges our garden soil much deeper down. When we can capture the rainwater, we reduce the need for using the municipal water to irrigate our landscapes, which is especially important. And when we can also keep rainwater on site, it's going to reduce and prevent flooding. It's going to reduce that stormwater runoff, and it's going to prevent those pollutants that can get swept away from our properties into those waterways. So something to keep in mind and to consider, which is always very inspiring for me, is that when we can capture rainwater, 1 inch of rain over 8,000 square foot surface, we are able to capture over 600 gallons of water. So I know it's a big investment. I started with the smaller barrels, like in the lower left corner, those blue barrels. Mine are actually kind of a terracotta color, but I I feel like it's almost an addiction. I can't get enough. But they daisy chain together, which is a very easy way for me to add more so that I can capture and store more rainwater. But there are all types of shapes and sizes out there. Daily Axe in Petaluma has some great information on their website. Greywater Action has some great information on their website. Harmony Farm and Supply and Garden has some great information, and any other irrigation and farm supply in the area, of course, will. And then rain gardens are basically a creek bed that you can create in your own garden. It's a very shallow, depressed area with rocks, and then we're going to plant with California native plants that are able or capable of receiving water during the rainy season with ease without being stressed. And that water is going to come from the downspout or some other source of runoff from maybe a roof line. And then that water fills that shallow basin and it spreads it out, and then it slowly infiltrates into that soil. So that's that slow it and spread it mantra. And this is going to be an excellent way to get water to deeper rooted trees and shrubs. Like maybe you have a hedgerow that you really want to direct that water and divert it to the outer edges of the canopy of those plants so it can really access the root zone. The water shouldn't be, this is not a pond that we're creating, and that water should not be sitting in that basin for longer than 24 hours. It really should absorb and move into the soil with ease. And the best plants for rain gardens, as I mentioned, are going to be our California natives that can handle winter wet and long periods of summer dry, and that also attract our native pollinators and beautiful and are so attractive and regionally appropriate for our area. And then, of course, increasing permeable surfaces. So if we do have a landscape project in the future, or we're looking to renovate some areas, we want to consider increasing those permeable surfaces by using decomposed granite or mulch or pea gravel or dry laid pavers instead of concrete. We want to allow that water to enter the soil wherever and whenever possible, which will increase the moisture going into the root zone of the plants and will stay in the soil longer. Because keep in mind, just because there's a path there, it doesn't mean the roots aren't able to grow underneath that path. So we want to hydrate them. And then some additional resources that you might want to check out when we do have pest problems that come up. Of course, the Our Water, Our World website has about 18 fact sheets for common pest problems that we've partnered with the University of California to make it very user-friendly. And then, of course, pest problems beyond what we have, we can always go to the UC statewide IPM programs website, which is a very large searchable database that has so much information for you in regards to pest management and growing healthy landscapes and gardens. And then, of course, if there is a bug in your garden that you cannot identify, I love going to bugguide.net. I take a photo of that bug in question and I email it to them, and I get a response pretty quickly, usually about 30 minutes. And then, of course, if there's any pesticides that you might have in your inventory that you're curious about how the active ingredients are, how they work, what's the mode of action, what are any potential risks or unintended consequences to consider. The National Pesticide Information Center is one of my favorites. They are neutral, it's very user-friendly, and there is so much great information there. So I'd like to thank you for joining us. Let's finish with your questions. Again, yeah, if questions happen to come up later and I didn't get to them this evening, then we can, please feel free to reach out to me. I am Suzanne at plantharmony.org. All right.